you like to welcome us?
Sure, Rabbi. Thank you. Um, I'm sure we're all glad to be back for Sage, even though it's just a virtual Sage. But we'll try to make the best of it for this deeper learning experience. Um, Rabbi Knight needs no introduction, and Donna Tarney is the education coordinator at the Greenspon Center at Queen's University. And I welcome you all and turn it over to Rabbi Knight.
Great. Thank you, Harry. Thank you. And thank you for your leadership. And I thank the SAGE committee and the team of people who are involved in making this happen, and really making sure that we continue learning and engaging in a way that is deep and profound. Today happens to be International Holocaust Remembrance Day. It was 76 years ago today that Auschwitz was that Auschwitz was liberated, and so on today, of all days, to be able to start Sage and to have a conversation that we're going to be having today is incredibly important, because so many people in our congregation, so many people in our community have said to me, Rabbi, I am concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism. And I think that there's a lot of reasons to be concerned about the rise of anti-Semitism. And we talk about anti-Semitism sometimes as something that rises or falls, and I'm not sure that it is exactly like that. We have to, as the title of this class sort of says, we have to think about anti-Semitism in a different way, in a way that sort of explores that it is a type of machinery, a type of tool that is used by people to achieve a specific purpose. And in that sense, and we'll talk about even and also today, by the way, there's also been a new Donna can actually talk about this, a new definition of anti-Semitism that's even being that is being finally ratified, I guess, after many years. So it's very prescient that we're having this particular conversation. I will say that as much as I love teaching Sage, when we talked about this as a Sage committee, I recognized very early on that I was not going to do this anywhere as near of justice, unless I had someone like Donna Tarney helping us out. And I cannot thank enough Donna for her leadership, for her expertise, for her thoughtfulness in this area. And so without further ado, we're going to learn from with Donna, and then of course break out into groups and have conversations as well. If you have questions, by all means, put them in the chat box, and I'll monitor the chat box. You can even message me, and we'll also have conversations as well. And if you need to unmute yourself to ask a question, just let us know. But try to stay muted so that we can allow the conversation to move forward. Donna.
Hello, and thank you. First of all, I greatly appreciate the invitation to come and speak to your group. One of my favorite things to do is teach. I spent 14 years teaching in a Catholic high school, Charlotte Catholic High School. I am a Catholic person, and my interest in anti-Semitism was piqued about 10 years ago when I first learned of the Christian roots of anti-Semitism and how far back and how deep those roots go. And so I took it upon myself to learn everything that I could possibly learn, as my religious tradition seemed to be responsible for the, the seeding of the ground of both Western and Eastern Europe that allowed the hatred of the Jewish people to take root, and for the Nazis to just build upon what was already there when they created and implemented the final solution against the Jewish people. So, as a teacher, I always like to challenge my students and see what they know. So, before I begin telling you anything or breaking this open, I am going to give you a little quiz. What I'm going to do is share my screen and show you 5 examples of anti Semitic beliefs, laws, edicts, ideas, and I want you to guess as best you can who promulgated this belief or law or edict. Was it the church, the Nazis, or both? So you don't have to have a pen or pencil. It's only 5 short questions. And as soon as you make a guess, I'm going to reveal the answers. So you don't even have to wait. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to get started and we'll see how you do. So we're going to play from here. So here is the first edict. Someone in history said that the Talmud and other Jewish books are forbidden and will be burned. So what do you think? Was it the church? Was it the Nazis? Or was it both of these institutions? I'll give you a minute to think about it. And now we'll find out. So who said this? Oh, well, the first organization to say this was the, at that point, Christian church. There was no Catholic and Protestant in 681 CE. The Synod of Toledo. That's when a group of bishops and important people got together and made their rules. The reason that they thought these books should be burned was by 681, the church was very much a part of European society. Christians and Jews were living in one another's company, and some of the Christian leaders thought that the Talmud specifically contained teachings that were against Christians specifically. So then we have a little bit later in history, Martin Luther, who was the first Christian priest to break away from the traditional universal Christian church, and he founded Lutheranism. He was very upset with the Christian church. He thought they were not doing a good job converting Jews to Christianity. He thought he could do a better job. By the end of his life, he had not done a better job, because if someone does not want to convert, they're not going to convert. And so he wrote an entire book called The Jews and Their Lies. And he was just ranted against these stubborn Jews who wouldn't convert. One of the things he encouraged his followers to do was to burn the literature of the Jewish people. And of course, after Kristallnacht in November 1938, the Nazis joined along with that historically already embedded idea. Okay. Jews need to go to ghettos and their property must be confiscated.
Can I ask a quick question? Donna, do you want us to vote in the chat box, or how do you want us to do this?
Yeah, that would be awesome. You can vote in the chat box. That's great.
So it's C for church, or N for Nazis, or B for both.
B for both. Yeah,
Okay.
And this one somehow got out of order, so it didn't have the phrase by itself. Sure, you can vote in the chat box. Beautiful. Church, Nazis, both. Okay, I see a both. I see an N, I see a C, I see some B. So we have all kinds of different guesses here. Okay. All right. So let's see. There we go. The first person to say this was Pope Leo XII in 1826. And this was because during this time, the church believed, as she had believed throughout history, that Jewish people were working with the devil to steal the souls of Christian people. And in order to get them separated, so this wouldn't happen, Pope Leo said, okay, I'm finished with these Jews being everywhere. They have to go to their own place so we know where to avoid. The next person to encourage this was St. John of Kronstadt, a little bit later in the 1800s. He was a Russian Orthodox leader. And if you're familiar with the Pale of the Settlement in Russia, this was an extreme part of southeastern Russia that was really not a great place to live. This isolated Jews again from the general Orthodox Christian population, and it also deprived them of social and economic benefits of living in the country of Russia. And of course, the Nazi laws after the invasion of Poland in 1939 continued, again, this historical trend of isolating the Jews and taking their property along the way. So here we go. There's my slide. This statement was made by someone. Did this someone belong to the church, the Nazi Party, and in this case, there's not a both, just one person said this. And someone said, weren't the ghettos of Rome and Venice established in the 16th century by a church edict? They were, but for purposes of this particular presentation, I wanted to pull it back or a little more forward to the 1800s to show you how close we are to the Nazi ideas and the fact that it was both Western and Eastern Europe around the same time. But that is true. And the first ghetto was actually established in South Africa way, way back before the church did it. Okay, so we have church both, church. Okay, let's find out. Wherever he comes, he destroys. This was just the Nazis specifically. Now, of course, the church believed that, but there was a German National Catechism published in 1934. Notice this is long before the invasion of Poland. And this little tiny book was distributed to churches, households, schools, businesses for free. And people were required to memorize what was in this book. Just like with a church catechism, you memorized automatic answers to questions. So if a Nazi official asked you a question and the answer was in the German National Catechism, you better know the answer. So this was the answer about who is the Jew and what does he do to Germany. Okay, Jews must wear distinguishing patches on their clothing that are clearly visible to others. So what do you think? Church, Nazis, or both? Okay, Nazi. Nazi. See, lots of N's, both. One person thinks it's both. Nazi, both. Okay. So let's find out. Again, the church first did this in 1215, the Fourth Lateran Council. Again, this was a gathering of bishops and important church leaders. And they did this because, again, this belief that the Jews were going to somehow undermine Christian salvation has been around for a long time. And so the Fourth Lateran Council said, we can't distinguish the Jews anymore. They look too normal. So we need them to put patches on the outside of their clothing so that we can tell and we can stay away. Because there were lots of laws about who you could even be friends with. And of course, the Nazis after November 1938 made this a law in Germany, even before they invaded Poland. Okay, and the very last one. This was a statement. And wear the color yellow, correct. The first patches were circles and they were yellow. So when Hitler implemented that, he kept the yellow color, but he changed the symbol to the Star of David. And this was a statement made by someone. Do you think they belonged to the church or to the Nazi Party? Nazis. Both. Okay. Nazis. Both. All right, well, let's find out. So this statement was made by Bishop Sigismund Waitz at the Conference of Christian Academians. And note the date. It is fascinating that 1925, the interwar period, this was a conference that was held in Switzerland. Many Christian church leaders from several different denominations met on a bi-yearly basis to just review what's your theology, what's going on in your part of the world, how are you dealing with different social and economic pressures, what is your faith response? So Bishop Sigismund reminded the people with him, this was part of his response about what are we going to do with the Jews? So as we know that World War I, the Germans blamed the Jews for the loss of World War I. And so this idea of a Jewish threat was very present between the wars. And this man was not even, he was an American bishop in the, I believe, Episcopal tradition. And he is making a statement that everyone knows is true. So when we think about anti-Semitism and we think about why did Hitler hate the Jews? That's a statement, a question I often get from students when I teach this in school. It's because he was a normal Western European. Anti-Semitism was a part and parcel of the culture, unfortunately, during the time that Hitler was coming into adulthood. So his beliefs were nothing outstanding or unusual. But what he did with those beliefs was absolutely outstanding and unusual. So the question then becomes, for me personally, not why did Hitler hate the Jews or why was there so much anti-Semitism? I go back further than that because being raised Catholic, I know that Jesus, the historical man, was a Jewish man. The earliest followers of Jesus were Jewish men. So it surprised me that a religious tradition founded by Jewish men would become so anti-Semitic. So when I did some investigation into how this happened, I discovered something very interesting. After the diaspora of the Jewish people from the area around Jerusalem and throughout the Mediterranean, at that point in history, the uprising against the Roman Empire took place from within the Jewish tradition, and the Jews who followed Jesus were asked to fight with the regular Jews and overthrow Rome, try at least. They said no. And that's when the real split between the Jewish followers of Jesus and mainstream Judaism occurred. Prior to that, the Jews who followed Jesus were just this little weird sect that thought they had found the Messiah again. And they were tolerated. They were allowed to visit synagogues. They were allowed to come and go. They were considered just a weird little sect of Judaism. But after they refused to fight with their Jewish brothers and sisters, the larger Jewish community was like, no, you didn't stand with us, so you must not be who we thought you were. And that's really when you start seeing the words Christianity and the idea of Christians become a separate thing. And so everyone's dispersed throughout the Mediterranean, Christians and Jews. And these little Christian pockets are preaching kind of their own thing, which is why the different gospel writings in the Christian scriptures have a different tenor to them. Some are talking to people who were Jewish. Some are speaking to just Gentiles. John's gospel, which we'll look at in a minute, is speaking to a little sect of people who were in hiding and were in competition with other Jesus groups in their area. They were all using different language and different ideas, and they were more concerned with their own survival than even looking at the Jewish religious tradition in a whole. So what happens though, after this diaspora is over for the Christians, Constantine makes Christianity not, he takes away the, words are leaving me now, the oppression, the persecution of the Christians. And all of a sudden, Christianity comes back together and starts making its own big catechism. They start to solidify their teachings and they start to promulgate one message throughout the empire. Unfortunately, this doesn't happen until about 300 CE. And this is one of the writings, it's called the Constitution on the Jews. And if you just read through this, the first part of the language is a little heavy, but the last interpretation of a Hebrew scripture tells the story of how this tiny little group of Christians starts to become anti-Jewish. So this writer was one of the Pope's assistants. And he's talking about how if you're going to persecute the Jews, you can't kill them all. Because Hebrew scriptures say, if we kill all the Jews, then we might forget ourselves, where we came from. That's an interpretation of Psalm 58, verse 59. His understanding of it: do not wipe out the Jews completely. Yes, lest perhaps Christians might be able to forget thy law, the law of God, which the former, the Jews, although not understanding it, presented in their books for those who do understand it. So right around this time, 250 to 350 CE, you have these men who are church leaders who are looking back at Hebrew scriptures and saying, the Jews don't understand those scriptures. They're not smart enough. They're something's missing. But thank goodness they're still around so that us Christians can interpret them fully. And so what you have is the original followers of Jesus were just trying to say, he's the Messiah, let's get on the boat. In 300 CE, the church fathers are saying, he's the Messiah for the Christians. He came to establish the Christian religious tradition. The Jews missed that and killed him. So several of these earliest writings were used to justify this fact that the Jews had not only missed the boat, but were actually evil, even though they didn't understand how evil they were. So the Gospel of John, he's writing to this tiny little group about who Jesus really was. He uses prose, he uses mystical images. He is not a straight out forthright writer. He did that on purpose because it was a Gnostic gospel, which meant only if you're in the group do you understand what it means. So here is one tiny piece of a very long sermon that Jesus was supposedly giving to his followers. And the followers were a large group of Jewish people. This tiny piece of that long, long sermon has been used for centuries to prove that Jews are in cohort with the devil. Unfortunately, the whole context of this is ignored by those church leaders in 300 to 400 CE. The whole context is Jesus was talking to a group of people, some of which had followed him and then left. And so he's basically saying, if you believed in me first and then you left, you must be following the devil. And what John is doing here, he does throughout his whole gospel. He talks about the Jews as if all the Jews were bad. He was still Jewish when he wrote this. What he's really doing is like what a lot of Christian religious traditions do today. They throw shade or they insult other religious traditions that don't do things the way they do. So the Pentecostal movement might say the evangelical movement is doing church the wrong way. A lot of Christian religious traditions say that the Catholic Church, because we have the Pope as our leader, is really following the devil. It's the same thing. John's followers would have understood this, and they would have understood this wasn't about all the Jews, just about the Jews that didn't agree with the way they were doing things. It's a piece of rhetoric that is used throughout history.
Donna, we have a couple questions. Is that,
Yeah, go
is that
for it.
possible? Great.
Yep.
So a couple of questions that emerged was sort of, one, were Jews trying to convert others, and at this time, in sort of,
Nope.
go ahead.
Nope. Just like my understanding today, the Jewish religious tradition is not evangelical. You do not go out and make converts. If people are attracted to Judaism and want to join, there's a process. That was the same back then. They were not evangelical. They just wanted to be who they were and grow themselves and be left alone.
What I would say is that there have been times in history where there were Jewish movements that did try to encourage conversion or forcibly convert others, and that the rabbis really reacted negatively to that, and so at a later point it was really frowned upon to really view Jewish conversion in that way. Another question that sort of emerged was from Leslie Cohen, was sort of saying that Jesus followers were at Masada and buried at a separate cave, but part of the resistance against the Romans. Were there some Christians who were against the Romans early on?
Oh, absolutely. There were definitely Christians who were against the Romans, but when push came to shove, the message of Jesus was mostly pacifism turn the other cheek. If the person asks for your shirt, give them also your cloak. Give, 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 be peace. And so the majority of the Christians just refused to take up arms and stand up, because they very much believed that before their death, before their particular lifetime was over, this Messiah was going to come again. So there was an early belief that the apocalypse was coming before the end of their natural lives. So there wasn't really too much concern about the distant future.
How do you see the difference between, in anti-Judaism, which you have sort of established right here, and anti-Semitism?
Oh, that's wonderful. I have a video about how that shifts. Um, Anti-Judaism is based purely on the fact that you practice the religious tradition called Judaism. You practice it as an adherent. You observe the rituals. You observe all of the orthodoxy, and you have the belief that Jesus is not the Messiah. So at this point in history, 300 through about 1200, you could convert and not be Jewish anymore. That changes after about 1200, when anti-Judaism morphs into this anti-Semitism, which is based more on culture and birth than religious tradition.
You sort of enter into this idea of a supersessionist, what's sort of called supersessionism. Can you describe that a little more and just sort of define that for us? Because I think that at least what you're gathering, what it looks like to me, is that you're saying that that what ends up entering the church is this notion and idea that it was good that we have some Jews survive in order to make us remember the quote unquote Old Testament, right? And it's good for some Jews, but really what's happened is that Jesus and Christianity has superseded Judaism and in all respects. And so it's okay that we have some Jews, but we really need to minimize and or keep them as separate as possible.
Oh,
Is that accurate?
absolutely. Supersessionism, the whole idea of this, what's called the new covenant, is preached in all of Christianity. So in several places in the gospel narratives, Jesus says, especially in reference to his Last Supper, which many Christians believe was a Passover Seder, he raises the third cup. First, he breaks the bread. He says, "This is not the bread anymore. This is my body." The new covenant, which replaces the old covenant. Now, the early Christians in the 60s and 70s, that wasn't their thing. That isn't what they believed. They believed he had fulfilled the Jewish covenant, and now Judaism was full. He raises the third cup, and he says the blessing, and then he says, "I am doing something new. This is the cup of my blood, the cup of salvation. And I will not drink the last cup until I drink it with my Father in heaven." So it's this whole idea that Jesus takes what was, makes it something new. Then by about 300 CE, that had evolved into, and so the old is gone. The fulfillment idea was over, and the supersessionist idea had entered the narrative for the Christian religious tradition. So the Jews are the old, the Christians are the new, and therefore the better and the complete.
Right. So thus, even the definition of a New Testament, the idea of a New Testament, is a supersessionist idea.
Absolutely.
Got it. Great.
Okay. And Leslie is putting some things in the chat box. Let me peek at him real quick. The Jesus Commission said the...
Can I ask the question?
Sure.
To you. As the way I understood it, the departure between Judaism and Christianity came when Christians rather, that went out into the diaspora and began converting heathens, abandoned the ritual of circumcision particularly, and did not keep kosher. And so they were seen as being different from the Jews that were Christians that stayed in Jerusalem. The Jews that stayed in Jerusalem, the Christians that stayed in Jerusalem eventually adopted the same practices as the other Jews, and they substituted baptism for circumcision. And these were major demarcations from Judaism. And my understanding was they started occurring in the diaspora about 70 years after the death of Jesus, and continued after that. And about I guess it was about the first century of 100, AD or CE. Then there was a shift, and Jews that were still, those Jews that still existed in the center in Jerusalem, that were Christians, also adopted the other, beliefs and practices.
That is also correct. It's a little more complicated than that when you really start looking into the specific history. The Jews who stayed in Jerusalem, and there's a big conversation about this in a book called The Acts of the Apostles, which was written by Luke, it's kind of a history of the growth of the early church. Paul and Peter, two of the greatest church leaders in the Christian religious tradition, were actually arguing with each other. Paul felt his call was to the Gentiles, the pagans, the heathens, and he didn't feel like adult men should have to undergo circumcision to join the group, because as of the writing of Luke, which was about 69, 70 CE, Peter was still requiring everyone become Jewish to follow the Jewish Jesus, because that's the way it was. And then Paul was arguing against that. And this is where we get the ideas of deviating from the kashrut or kashrut. Paul was saying, it's not what a man puts into his mouth that makes him unclean, but that which comes forth from his mouth, which makes him unclean. And so they have this argument, and it's ongoing. And so in and around Jerusalem, they were still allowed to go into synagogues, into areas of teaching. They were still allowed to proselytize their Messiah. And it wasn't until they refused to defend their own people that the Jewish religious tradition made the final cut. Up till then, they had been tolerated, even though in the further areas around the Mediterranean and outside of Jerusalem, they were not following the Jewish religious tradition. In Jerusalem, they were still recognized if they adhered, which Paul did and Peter did. So it was situational, locational, until that final, no, we're done. But yes, good point. Thank you, Leslie.
Great.
Okay. All right, I'm going to share my screen again, but not for too long, because y'all are going to get to go talk to each other in just a minute. Okay, so supersessionism. We're just going to skip this one. We're going to go right to this one. So this is a letter that Paul, who was one of the great Christian leaders, in fact, a lot of people say he is the person who shaped the Christian religious tradition into what it is, given the fact that he didn't think non-Jews had to become Jewish to follow Jesus. And he wrote the majority of what are called the letters in the Christian scriptures, which are literally pages of advice to churches that are popping up around the Mediterranean area. Now, Paul was a Sadducee. He was a great Jewish leader in his time, highly educated. So he brings his understanding of Judaism to these new churches. Now, this letter, it's called the Letter to the Thessalonians, the church in Thessalonica. This is a cherry-picked verse that is from a much longer last speech given by a martyr who is talking to the Jewish people. He's about to die because of the things that he's done. He's going to be stoned to death. He's been found guilty of heresy. His name was Stephen. And the whole of chapter 8 is devoted to introducing how Paul is this highly intelligent Jewish leader. He converts. When Paul writes about the Jews, and this is his interpretation of Stephen's last stand, as it were, he is not talking about all of the Jews. Paul, through the words of Stephen here, is talking about any Jewish group that's just not in agreement with the Jewish followers of Jesus. This type of writing can be found throughout history. It's similar to what John has put forward, and it's spoken here by a man who is about to die because of his belief that Jesus really is the Messiah. So it's finally it's his last words to the people that he thinks are wrong, based completely on his personal conviction. Again, this is one of the verses that the church fathers used when they were putting together the catechism against the Jews, basically. And it leads up to much, much, much trouble, and it gives people permission who are Christians to really believe that the Jews killed Jesus, which was one of the most damaging statements that has been carried throughout history. Because if you killed Jesus, according to Christians, you killed God, because Jesus was God. Now, the majority of the early Christians were illiterate. They couldn't read. They took everything they heard to heart from these church leaders, and anti-Semitism began to grow in these little church pockets all around the Mediterranean. But by about 150 CE, the scriptures were also distributed, and they were kind of becoming a conglomerate. But these tiny churches were still under persecution. They were not combined, and they didn't have a lot of power. So next week, we're going to see how they get their power. And I gave you kind of a glimpse of this when I sent out the writings of St. John Chrysostom, who was, as you could probably tell, very displeased with the Jews, because when he lived around 200, so this was before Christianity was widespread. Actually, he was like 280, but it was coming out of the era of persecution at the time. He wrote 8 homilies against the Jews because Christians were joining in the Jewish fasts, believe it or not, like Yom Kippur, and they would get into it. They liked fasting. They liked giving oblation to God. They liked the ritual. They liked the doing. They also were joining in the feasts, the Feast of Booths and Rosh Hashanah. They liked the feasting of the Jews. The Christian church at that point didn't have anything like that. So they would go to the Jewish stuff, then they would go to the Christian services on Sundays. So they were going back and forth. And John Chrysostom did not like that. And so he created these homilies, which he widely distributed via courier at that point. There was no mail. So his homilies made their way around the Mediterranean. And he is really the one who took these ideas and solidified them and dispersed them. So we're going to send you into breakout rooms, and you are going to be able to discuss the readings that I sent out with the questions that accompanied them. So Rabbi Knight, I'm going to give it back to you for final instruction about this.
That's great. So, so everyone, we're going to put it up on the chat box. Make sure that you have the email that we sent out. If you don't have the email that we sent out, we also have in the chat box. Tracy, are you able to put the link into the chat box? Great. We're going to place the link into the chat box, and you can download very quickly the discussion. Now, we invite you, as you break up into groups, these groups are going to be led by members of the SAGE committee. Please take a moment to introduce yourselves to one another, and to welcome one another into our this space. And then hopefully you've pre-read the selections, but if you haven't, it's also an opportunity to even read it together, or and to answer some of the questions that are there. Tracy has loaded the Dropbox document, which you can press right there and pick up the document. And we're going to break you up into groups right now with members of the SAGE committee helming and leading the conversation in each group. So we thank you so much. We'll join back in a little while, and we'll message everyone when we're about to bring everyone back. Please click join for joining the small group now.
Sit, sit.
Well, it is so good to see you all return. I felt so lonely there for a little while, and I have to say also, just as a side note, which I should have said earlier, it is just so good to see your faces, and I am deeply looking forward to being transitioning from 2D to 3D and being able to actually see you in person. So we're going to have an opportunity to ask questions and to sort of explore the text that we looked at. Just so that you know, I'm happy to call on you, and Donna's going to and really help to lead the conversation. Down below at the bottom, if you're on your screen, there's something called reactions, and you can see sort of one of the things that you can press is something that says reactions. And if you press reactions, it says raise hand. And if you raise your hand, that helps me sort of identify who is going to be called upon and to invite you to ask a question. Of course, if you just want to text me in the chat and you want to ask your question over chat, I'm happy to ask your question on your behalf. But of course, we're always welcome to have you ask the questions. So we'll move forward. Donna, you ready to do this?
Sure.
Great.
So the first thing I would love to know is what were your reactions to the texts? Just generally speaking, how did they impact you? What did you think about them? Was there something that stood out in particular? So just general reactions to these really incendiary texts.
Winifred, she doesn't know it, but I'm going to ask her because the time ran out to be the spokesperson for discussion room 7. So do you want to answer that question or have a shot at it? She has a very interesting background, which we don't have time to go into. You have to unmute yourself, Winifred. Can we hear you now?
Okay, yes. So the question is our reaction to these rather incendiary remarks. And I guess it's that there was some comments made as to personal experiences that probably would find their roots in these remarks, that saying that this is continuing. And I think that I made that comment that to me, the most disturbing thing is how very appropriate they are for our situation right now, that the whole white supremacist anti-Semitism is very active, and where is it going to end?
Thank you. Yes, as I was picking them out, I noticed that they were very, unfortunately, timely. Thank you. Someone else.
Bob Wolf has his hand raised.
Yeah, I think one of the things we noted was the defensiveness of a lot of this. That it as you pointed out, Donna, that it was about Christianity trying to survive in a time when it was trying to grow, and its participants being drawn back into the old religion. And it was a point of saying absolutely no. That and in order to do that, they couldn't just say we're better. They had to say there's something evil about the other. And that's something that carries through to today, that you have to demonize the other. And it's the concept of the other. And that's how we move from anti-Judaism, which is theological, to anti-Semitism, which is racial and all the other components of it.
Thank you. Absolutely. The demonization stands out extremely. And you're right. It's not enough that we're better. Somebody has to be worse.
It's really scary how easy it is to sway people. You know, that to me is interesting and frightening at the same time. You know, we can feel it happening. It's not like we can't feel it. We know that it's happening. You know, it reminds me of the days of Germany, where in my youth, I used to say, well, why did they stay there? Why couldn't they see it happening? Why didn't they leave? You know, and yet here we are. It's pretty scary.
I agree.
No, yeah. I mean, I think that Donna and I in our conversations have had a lot of conversations about that and absolutely agree. And I think that it has been made more, prescient by the, by actually the, to what others have said as well, which is that it is, the language of all of this feels so, uh, contemporary.
Yeah.
And if you're looking at actually modern, and as we get to it later on, as we talk about more sort of modern forms of uses of anti-Semitism to further other specific political gains, right, or particular gains, we see the use of the same types of language to be able to do that. And so whether it's QAnon, right? Which is effectively the modern form of the elders of the protocols of the elders of Zion, right? Is a new form of that, or other types of conspiracy theories and other things. They're going to use this they're going to use this types of language in order to affect the kind of change they want to see. Right. In other words, and maybe this is, and Donna, maybe this is better asked as a question. It seems as though the anti-Judaism threads through the church had a specific, had very specific purpose, right?
Yes,
Do
it
you
did.
want
Yeah.
to, can you speak a little about that?
Sure. The purpose was to, as somebody said, I think it was Bob who said, you have to have someone who is an enemy, who is evil, in order for you to be good. There's this dichotomy, this understanding that even when the Reformation happened, it can't be that Luther was right about a lot of things he said and that we were right about some other things. It was that now you're evil because you left us. And the threat to the early Christian church of losing membership, it was more about losing face and competition than it really was about the Jews being anything at this point. So you had to invent an enemy. You had to invent a reason for Christians to avoid the synagogue. According to Chrysostom's writings, the synagogue was a temple to a pagan god because the Jews didn't really know who they were worshiping. They didn't realize that Satan was their god at the time, which was bizarre in my thoughts and in anybody's thoughts that's reasonable. But the church wanted to increase herself. The church is referred to as a she in the Christian religious tradition. And in order to do that, you couldn't have someone who had loyalties in two different places. And so basically they're molding the people who are on the fence and scaring them into staying. And a lot of it becomes about money. Because as the church is expanding, you have to have assets. At the time during the persecution of the church and of the Jewish people, assets come from your attendees. There's no state-sponsored church yet. So if your people are leaving you to go somewhere else, they're taking their money with them. So practically speaking, a lot of this had to do with economics, and a lot of it had to do with very crazily fervent believers like Chrysostom. At some place in his self, he truly believed that the only salvation was through the church. And it just gets warped when you refuse to see another side of things, when you refuse to see the other as human. It's easy to see yourself as more divine. So there was this ascendancy, this desire that if we're wrong in this part, if we allow people to go to the synagogue and participate in fasts and feasts, then what sets us apart? What makes us better? So it was this idea of spiritual supersessionism as well as economic necessity. If everybody leaves and splits their tithes, the church loses. Yes, Constantine's Sword is a wonderful, wonderful book.
Betsy Garfinkel, you have your hand up.
I just wanted to say to the group to please excuse me. I had a phone call from Phil's doctor, my husband, who is at Waltonwood, who has dementia. And I just had to leave to talk to them.
That's okay.
I just wanted to tell you that because I didn't want to be rude, and I'm sorry that I missed most of this. I did want to say that when I was in New York with my son, we went to the Jewish Museum where they had 3 floors of information that was just incredible to me, relating to the beginnings, as what Donna talked about. And I remember it was struck me, they had a map up of the world, and they had little dots all over the map. I mean, you could hardly see, the map was red and the little dots. All of those dots represented Jewish people. And I think that was just so visual to think about what we were, in numbers.
Thank you, Betsy. Connect Leslie and then Michael Norman and then Harry and Ruth.
To me, what you're talking about in the first century is a consolidation of the church and consolidation of its power over its people. So, and its power to define itself and define itself in relationship to the others, Jews being part of the others. And when Paul focused his mission more on the diaspora and the heathens, as they called them, or the Gentiles rather than the Jews, I think that was part of that too. It was a move to separate and consolidate the movement and give it its own identity and power through money. I think you were very, very right about that too.
But what's
Thank you.
interesting is that the writing of Chrysostom is happening in the late 4th century, and by the late 4th century, still in the late 4th century, there was enough Christians clearly willing to participate in Jewish holidays, right? It's a polemic against also Christians observing Jewish holidays, and that so it's clearly showing there was at least enough of that actually happening in order to have a polemic.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's kind of amazing. And yeah.
Okay. I think we had Harry next. Is that right? Harry and Ruth?
I just wanted to make the comment that when Donna was talking about demonizing the other, it really reminds me of the situation today that we have with political parties. It's a way you're either on my side or you're on the other side, and if you're not on my side, then I'm going to demonize you. It's a very common thing.
And money is still an issue also.
Yeah.
Yes. As much as things change, they stay the same, unfortunately, in these ways.
Michael Norman and then Rabbi Gershon. Michael, if you can unmute yourself.
This is for Rabbi and for Donna. I have not heard the term supersessionism before. So could one of you please explain that in the context of the remarks that you made?
Donna,
Sure.
do you want me to take that, or do you want to?
I'll do it. So to
Sure.
supersede something is to go above and beyond and to kind of negate that which came before. So with the early Christians that decided Christianity is replacing Judaism, although it came from Judaism, there's no question about that, even throughout this whole time of anti-Semitism.
Got it.
Yeah.
So practically speaking, here's a perfect example how this shows up every day. And some people will say, well, Rabbi, do you read the Old Testament, right? Particularly in Charlotte, that's a question I might get a lot here in Charlotte, North Carolina, right? And the answer that I say is, no, I read the Tanakh, I read the Hebrew Bible, right? I don't read the Old Testament, because by virtue of saying that that's the Old Testament, we are also saying that there is a New Testament that has replaced and superseded the Hebrew Bible. So as a perfect, by virtue of calling it a New Testament, you are saying that is a new covenant that is being created, which is specifically why I'm very, politely, of course, will point out that it's not that Jews don't view it as the Old Testament. We don't call it or view it as the Old Testament. It's the Hebrew Bible, which is the Tanakh. Rabbi Gershon.
Yes, thank you. So I just wanted to make the point that it's so very concerning that the strategies from antiquity are still the same today. That is to say that it's so important to try to decipher what ulterior motives are. No matter whoever's arguing anything, demonizing anybody, opposing anybody, whether it's people, parties, institutions, whatnot, it's almost like we can't take what they say overtly as if it's the end of the matter. It's as if it's so important these days to see that so much of what goes on all sides is a lie. And that it's very important to understand what is the ulterior motive here. Because just as antiquity, people got snookered in, it's so easy for us to get taken over, today.
Absolutely. Thank you, Rabbi. Shelley?
Thank you. When you first started, I was filled with anger and fear. I felt it in my body. And as you went on, I had the thought that this sounds like the truth, what you're saying. And if this is the truth, then why does the church continue this teaching? Why doesn't the church start teaching the truth as a way to end this anti-Semitism and anti-Judaism?
That is a great question. And it's a question that when I taught this in my high school classes, the students were baffled that no one had taught them this before in their Catholic religion classes. In fact, the chaplain at the school called me down to his office to ask me why I was teaching things that were going to take the kids away from the faith.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And I had to talk with him and tell him that the things that I was teaching were our history, that were true. And if the students didn't learn that the origins of this terrible anti-Semitism were founded in our past, then they would never understand the power of religion for bad as well as for good. You can't just concentrate on one thing. Now, I will tell you that after World War II was over and the world began to learn about what happened during the Holocaust, there was a council called Second Vatican Council that was led by Pope John the 23rd, and he explicitly required the removal of several anti-Semitic phrases and ideas from our liturgy around our Easter celebrations, and also put it into writing in a document called Nostra Aetate that the Jews were not responsible for the death of Jesus, and that we were, if we continued to be anti-Semitic, it was non-Christian and it was sinful. Now, putting that in a church document is different than promulgating that among the faithful. So we are still in a time where if you go to certain churches, they are much better at addressing anti-Semitism, and other churches are not. But this is one of the reasons that I took it upon myself to teach this and to help Christians understand it's really our responsibility to mend the past. Our Pope called us to do it. Pope John Paul II went to Jerusalem and apologized for the church's role in the Holocaust, both in the implementation of anti-Semitism and in the neglect of standing up for the Jews as much as we could have. So although the institutional church has tried to address this past, it's the local churches that need to do a better job. And I believe it's because, like the priest who talked to me, if we know our hurtful, harmful past, maybe more people will leave the church. And I assured him that the youth have enough reason to leave the church without this being a reason. And that if we are honest about who we were, we can really improve who we are going to become.
But,
Well, I was just going to say, I thank you and congratulate you for the work that you're doing. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Shelley. No, I think it's important that things like this emerge periodically. Mel Gibson's movie, the Passion of Christ, right? His movie emerged the need to be teaching this, and Vatican II and the documents that Donna was referring to really emerged that again because of the way that movie promulgated precisely the supersessionist and actually horrible ideas of some of the early church within the movie. So these ideas emerge over and over again, and are very much relevant. Sam, you had a question?
I was just I think Donna elaborated about Vatican II. I wondered, it's like, what, 50 or 60 years ago?
1965.
Yeah, why it's not more widely known about.
Okay, so a little church politics. Vatican II, quote unquote, opened the windows of the church and allowed the Holy Spirit of the Lord to come in and refresh and renew. So John the 23rd, no one expected him to do this. He was supposed to be a placeholder pope. He was older, he was going to die. They figured he'd just hold the seat until somebody else came along. He changed everything. And what he did was he changed so much of the way that the church traditionally celebrated the Mass, the sacraments, just so much changed all at once. And then there was no intentional pedagogy to tell local dioceses and archdioceses how to implement the changes. That the pendulum in 1965, and actually it closed under the next pope because he died before it was finished. Dioceses and archdioceses throughout the world were left to interpret these documents in whatever way they saw fit, which led to a lot of ridiculousness in the 70s. And so there was a backlash against the implementation or non-implementation of these documents. And it turned into quite a hot mess. And to this day, there are areas of priests, segments of the priesthood who say Vatican II was heretical, it never should have happened. So we argue with ourselves far too much. And that's why these teachings were never really effectively put out. There wasn't a plan, and it was done poorly.
Right. I mean, it's not. I think it's really important to recognize that the Second Vatican document created a schism within the Catholic Church, right? And that itself was actually not insignificant. There are some, I can't even remember the sect or whatever its group, who actually believe that the Second Vatican basically created the conditions in which the Pope himself is no longer actually the representative leader of the Catholic Church.
That's the Pius X Society. They were excommunicated by the official church, but they don't recognize that.
I wanted to add something here too. When my daughter was little, we moved to North Miami Beach, where my parents and my family had moved, and I became a teacher at a synagogue there, a Sunday school teacher. The children there, just for the opposite side, they still thought that Jesus was responsible, in a huge way, Jesus himself, for harming the Jews. And also that he wasn't Jewish. They didn't know that he was Jewish. Now, things change slowly, you know what I mean? And so that was, don't forget, my daughter is 40 years old now, so she was about 8. But I just wanted to put that out there too. It's not just one-sided.
So I think it's not just one-sided. I think that the challenge there is partially also because of what ends up happening in Jesus's name, right, over generations, and sort of generations of trauma that actually that say, like, be as careful as possible and be scared of those who might be coming at you in Jesus's name. So what we're going to be doing is, and I want to call attention to the time, but what we're going to be doing in this class is actually moving from the conversation of what is the foundations of anti-Semitism, the sort of anti-Judaism that is so prevalent within the church, and when the church ultimately splits, and you have the Lutheran church, right, the Lutherans and Protestants, also is carried through those streams as well, and very much turns from an anti-Judaism to an anti-Semitism. And as we really go through this, class, we're going to continue to sort of explore these subjects, and how anti-Semitism is carried out in the modern day as well. Donna, do you want to say anything else before we sort of wrap up?
Just that I appreciate this opportunity, and you all are wonderful students. You have great questions and comments, and I really look forward to next month.
If you didn't get the questions before the meeting, please make sure to, we sent out an email, should have been in the RSVP email. We're going to continue to send readings out beforehand with questions that you'll be able to utilize and create small group opportunities. I want to thank Donna. I want to thank the SAGE team led by Harry Cronson and Bob Wolf in terms of Spice. And thank you so much to our Temple Beth El team, Natalie, and to Tracy, always for the back end support structures that help make everything possible. So thank you.
Terrific beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you all.
Thanks,
It's
everyone.
wonderful. Thank you very much. I really learned a lot.
Thank you.